This Robin Yount baseball card proves that he was sweeter than George Brett. If you grew up in the 1990s, you might be under the impression that Robin Yount and George Brett matched each other blow for blow during their 20-year careers. And you wouldn't be wrong, exactly. After all, both men were rookies during the 1974 season, though Brett also got a cup of coffee in 1973. Both suited up for only one major league team, the Milwaukee Brewers for Yount and the Kansas City Royals for Brett. Each man was considered the best player in his league at least once. Brett won the American League Most Valuable Player award in 1980, and Yount copped the American League MVPs in both 1982 and 1989. And of course, both future Hall of Famers crashed the 3,000 hit plateau in 1992, Yount on September 9th and Brett 3 weeks later on September 30th. Finally, both landed in Cooperstown in 1999. By that time, these dudes were in lockstep, and so was their 1975 Topps rookie cards. The Yount, number 223, and the Brett, number 228, were separated by just 5 slots on the checklist, and by virtually nothing in the monthly Beckett. Up and up and up the duo climbed, past 50, then 100, then 200. The sky was the limit. The two superstars had been nearly the same guy, doing the same things for decades, and it might never end. Except everything ends, eventually. And Yount and Brett really weren't that similar as they might have seemed on the surface as they rounded third and headed for home. In fact, most fans would have laughed out loud at the ballpark if you had suggested that Yount was even in the same league as Brett before the early 1980s. And again, that wasn't completely wrong thinking. Consider, Brett entered 1982 season with 1,366 hits and a .318 batting average. Yount stood at 1,153, surprisingly good, and .274. Brett was a threat to hit 400 some year, and actually did hit .390 in 1980. Yount's career-high batting average to that point was .293. Brett won the 1980 MVP and had 2 other top 3 finishes. Yount finished 17th in voting in 1980 and 1981. Brett was a key part of the Kansas City Royals teams that seemed to find the postseason year after year and might even win the World Series someday. Yount's Brewers didn't post a winning record until 1978 and had never made it to the playoffs. Brett had 6 All-Star appearances under his belt. Yount had 1 in 1980. Brett was a super-duper star, and Yount was merely solid. All of that would start to change in 1982, though, when the 26-year-old Yount helped the Harvey's Wallbangers Brewers all the way to the World Series, where they lost a 7-game classic against the St. Louis Cardinals. Brett, who finished 20th in the MVP balloting, turned 29 in May, and though he hit .301, his already fragile body, judging by the games played, was starting to age. From there until the end of his career, which spanned another 11 seasons, Brett appeared in 150 games just 3 times, and topped 140 twice more. Yount, more than 2 years younger, logged 6 more 150-game seasons and 2 more 140-gamers. Those extra games may not sound like much, but they let Yount start piling up the stats that would eventually pull him closer to even with Brett before the two legends retired. They also highlighted just how much of a prodigy Yount really was. Brett was a young 21 when he snared the Royals' starting third base job in 1974, but Yount was a downright juvenile 18 when he took over at shortstop for the Brewers that same summer. Those must have been sweet times for those two guys not far removed from high school diamonds, one of whom, Yount, debuted in the majors less than a year after his graduation. And while most of the world was ready to hop on the Brett train, departing Kansas City for diamonds across the land, there was at least one national powerhouse who gave the early nod to Yount. In 1975, baseball card collectors received a great gift, a reason to indulge in the sweeter things in life, all in the name of our hobby. That year, Hostess printed their first set of baseball cards, a 150-piece monster issued in 3 card panels on family-sized snack cakes box bottoms. And they also issued 60 of those same cards as singles in packages of Twinkies, with distribution reportedly limited to the West Coast. Whether your poison of choice was cupcakes or Twinkies, though, for the first time in memory, your baseball cards had an even sweeter accompanist than Topps bubblegum. That expansive checklist also meant that Hostess sets featured most of the game's biggest stars, with room left over to take a stab at a few more speculative names. They didn't come much more speculative than an 18-year-old shortstop from a perennial cellar-flirting team like the Milwaukee Brewers. But Hostess was all in on the young Robin Yount. Not only did Hostess include Yount in their base set, they also slid him into the Twinkies parallel. It's a pretty good looking card too, as these things go. While the design of the set is reminiscent of some cheap kid's toy television set, the photo of Yount features a smiling future legend posed in the SS crouch, waiting for the ball with his gold locks flowing from beneath his block letter M cap. Twinkies cards come up less often and still won't break the bank when you find them. By the way, you can differentiate the Twinkies version by the lack of the dotted line for cutting around the card front, and by the presence of a heavy black stripe on the back of the card. But as great as it is to have an extra Robin Yount rookie card or two to pursue, maybe the most glaring aspect of the 1975 Hostess checklist, more than 40 years on, is the lack of a George Brett card. So does that mean that Robin Yount has a sweeter disposition than George Brett? Well, I do recall a lot of smiling on Yount cards, and no preparation H grimacing, and no pine tar incident. So maybe. But no matter what the 1975 Hostess Robin Yount card says about his relative charms, there can be no doubt that he has the sweetest baseball cards among all Hall of Famers with 1975 Topps rookie cards, who reached the 3,000 hit plateau in 1992 and retired in 1993 and won at least one MVP award. You can look it up. Like our video? Then like our video and subscribe to our channel. WaxPackGods.com